You're not imagining it. A normal grocery run feels heavier than it used to, even when you buy the same bread, eggs, milk, and chicken you always buy. The bag does not look fuller, but somehow the total at checkout keeps climbing. You feel it at the gas pump, in your rent payment, and in that quick lunch you grab when you are too tired to cook after work. Even small everyday purchases now have a way of making your money feel smaller than it used to. That is what makes this so frustrating, because at the same time, you keep hearing that inflation is falling. That sounds like relief should be here already, like prices should be easing up instead of still punching you in the face. But when you open your banking app or glance at your credit card bill, it does not feel like relief at all. It feels like the exact opposite, like life got more expensive and then decided to stay there. So what gives? Why do the headlines sound calmer, while your wallet still feels under attack every single week? Why does the economy seem to say one thing, while your rent, groceries, and bills keep saying something else? The answer starts with one simple mistake that almost everyone makes. People hear falling inflation and picture falling prices. But those two things are not the same, and that difference is the whole story. Because when inflation falls, it usually does not mean prices are going back down to where they were before. It usually means prices are still rising, just not rising as fast as they were during the worst part of the surge. Think of it like driving on a highway. If a car slows from 80 miles per hour to 40, it is still moving forward. In the same way, if prices stop jumping fast, they can still keep moving higher, just at a slower pace. That is why your grocery bill can still rise even when inflation is falling. Last year, maybe your weekly food trip jumped from $100 to $120, and this year it rises again from $120 to $126. On paper, that looks like improvement, because the increase got smaller than before. But in real life, you are still paying more than you were, and your wallet only notices the final number, not the better-looking percentage behind it. That is the first thing to understand. Inflation measures the speed of price increases, not the actual level of prices. It tells you how fast the car is moving, not whether the car is driven back to where it started. So when news anchors say inflation is cooling, they are usually talking about the pace of change. They are not saying your rent is about to shrink, your groceries are about to rewind, or your utility bill is going back to last year's level. That explains the confusion, because most people are not living inside charts or government reports. They are living inside paychecks, grocery aisles, rent deadlines, car insurance bills, and the cost of getting through another normal month. And from that point of view, the thing that matters most is not how fast prices are rising now. The thing that matters is where prices ended up after all those earlier increases piled on top of one another. Once prices move higher and stay there, that new level becomes your new reality. You do not pay based on what inflation used to be, you pay based on the price tag in front of you today, and that is why life can keep feeling expensive. Rent is one of the clearest examples, because when rent jumps, it rarely falls back to the old number in any meaningful way. A landlord who raised a $1,500 apartment to $1,800 does not usually wake up later and cut it back. The same pattern shows up in groceries, restaurant meals, delivery fees, and basic services like repairs or haircuts. Once businesses find a higher price that customers can still manage to pay, that higher price often sticks around much longer than people expect. That is how inflation leaves a mark, not just through the speed of the increase, but through the higher level it creates afterward. Even if the storm passes, the waterline stays higher, and daily life keeps adjusting around that new level. And now we get to the part that hurts most. Your income does not always rise with those higher prices. If your paycheck grows slowly while everything around you gets more expensive, your money quietly loses strength even if the number on your paycheck barely changed. Economists call that purchasing power, but the simple version is this: how much your money can actually buy. If $100 used to cover a week of groceries and now only covers part of it, your money is not going as far as it used to. That is why so many people with jobs still feel squeezed, even if they are working the same hours or even more than before. The problem is not always that they stopped earning, the problem is that their earnings stopped keeping up with the cost of living. Maybe you got a raise, but if your raise was 3% while rent, food, insurance, and utilities climbed much more than that over time, the raise does not feel like progress. It feels like running harder just to stay in roughly the same place. That gap between wages and living costs changes daily behavior in ways people feel immediately. You cook at home more, skip little treats, put off replacing things, and hesitate before spending on anything that does not feel absolutely necessary. At first, those seem like small changes, maybe fewer takeout meals, fewer streaming subscriptions, or a cheaper grocery brand. But after enough months, those little changes start shaping your whole lifestyle, and that is when expensive stops being a number and starts being a feeling. And there is another reason this hits so hard. People naturally expect some kind of reset after a painful surge. If prices shot up fast, many assume they will eventually drift back down and make life feel normal again. But that is rarely how it works. In most cases, prices rise quickly, then level off at the higher point instead of dropping back to where they were. So what people are waiting for is one thing, but what the economy usually delivers is something very different, and that mismatch creates frustration. You expect relief, but what arrives is only a slower increase. That can sound like good news in a headline, yet still feel disappointing in real life, because your bank account is still dealing with the higher level created by the earlier jump. This is why inflation can fall, and people can still feel miserable about prices. The pain is not only in the speed of the climb, it is also in the fact that the climb already happened and the view from up here is still expensive. Look at your monthly budget, and you can see why this becomes so intense. Rent, groceries, gas, phone service, power, insurance, childcare, and car payments are not random purchases you can easily skip when prices move against you. These are the kinds of costs that show up again and again month after month, whether you feel ready or not. So even modest increases become heavy because they repeat constantly, and repeated pressure wears people down much faster than one-time shocks. That is also why a small price rise across many categories feels worse than one big increase in just one place. If groceries rise, gas rises, utilities rise, and insurance rises together, the combined effect can punch much harder than each increase seems to on its own. You are not reacting to one price tag. You are reacting to the pileup of all of them. That pileup is what makes a normal life start to feel like a more expensive version of the same routine, with fewer extras and less room to breathe. Now think about how these costs move through the system. If fuel gets more expensive, shipping gets more expensive. And when shipping gets more expensive, stores pay more to get products onto shelves, which means customers often pay more at the end. The same thing happens with labor, rent, and materials on the business side. If a restaurant pays more for ingredients, electricity, packaging, and wages, it usually does not absorb all of that forever. It pushes at least some of it into menu prices. That is why inflation often spreads far beyond the place where it started. A jump in one area can ripple into many others, until the cost of making, moving, storing, and selling things rises across the board, and everyday life starts feeling more expensive from multiple angles. By the time those higher business costs work their way through the chain, the customer sees only the final price. You do not see every step, you just see that your groceries, your takeout order, and your home repair estimate all suddenly seem harder to absorb. And even when inflation cools later, those higher costs do not always vanish. Companies may stop raising prices as aggressively, but they often keep the higher prices already in place, especially if demand is still strong enough and customers have adjusted. That is one reason people say it never goes back down. They may not mean literally every price stays frozen forever, but they do mean that once the system finds a higher price level, daily life tends to keep orbiting around it. There is also a mental side to this that matters more than people admit. You remember what things used to cost, and those memories become a constant reference point every time you shop, pay a bill, or look at a menu. If a fast casual meal used to cost $10 and now costs $14, your brain does not erase the old number just because the new one became normal. Each time you pay, you compare the present to the past, and that comparison keeps this thing alive. The same happens with rent, groceries, and basic household items. A carton of eggs, a gallon of milk, paper towels, detergent, all of them carry little memories of older prices, and those memories make the higher cost feel personal instead of abstract. So when people say everything feels expensive, they are not only reacting to math, they are reacting to memory, to the feeling that the same life now costs more effort, more planning, and more sacrifice than it did before. That is also why people can feel poor without crossing into some dramatic financial collapse. They may still be paying their bills, still going to work, still managing, but managing now takes more concentration and leaves less room for mistakes. You start noticing how often money decisions show up in your day. Should you drive that extra trip, eat out tonight, replace the worn shoes now, keep the old phone another year, or wait another week before filling the cart with everything you need? That constant calculation drains people in a way statistics do not capture very well. It is tiring to keep negotiating with your own budget, especially when it feels like the same paycheck is being asked to do more and more every few months. And here is something even more frustrating. Improvements in the economy often reach households slowly. Prices can stop accelerating before wages recover, before savings rebuild, and before people feel safe enough to relax about money again. So there is often a lag between what the data says and what daily life feels like. On paper, inflation may be cooling, But at home, your budget can still feel bruised, fragile, and one surprise bill away from another round of stress. That lag is important because it explains why people often distrust the happy tone of economic headlines. They are not crazy. They are not missing something obvious. They are simply living in the slower moving part of the story. The report may show that the pace of price increases has eased, but your household is still carrying the weight of the earlier surge. And until income, savings, and confidence catch up, the pressure remains very real no matter what the chart says. That is where concern turns into something deeper, because over time, expensive changes behavior in lasting ways. People delay moving out, postpone having children, avoid vacations, skip dental care, keep older cars longer, and put off repairs that should have been done earlier. These are not luxury decisions for many households. They are survival adjustments. When basic living costs rise and stay high, people begin reshaping their futures around caution, not because they want to, but because their budget keeps forcing the issue. Even families who appear stable from the outside may be quietly making cuts behind the scenes. Maybe they stop eating out, pause college savings, use credit more often, or carry stress they never had to carry at the same level a few years ago. This is how a high price level changes the emotional atmosphere of everyday life. It makes normal living feel tighter, planning feel riskier, and even small setbacks feel larger, because there is less spare capacity left in the budget. And once that feeling settles in, it can be hard to shake, even if some conditions improve. People learn to expect higher costs, to brace for the next jump, and to treat every bill as something that could have quietly become more painful. That mindset is rational, because it comes from lived experience. If groceries surprised you for months, if rent jumped, if insurance climbed, if your utility bill kept showing up higher, of course you stop trusting that things are about to get easier. So when someone says inflation is falling, the average person is not thinking about rate changes or annual comparisons. They are thinking, okay, but why am I still paying so much for the same stuff? And why does my paycheck still feel stretched? That question gets to the center of the whole issue. People do not live inside inflation rates, they live inside price levels, income gaps, and the repeated cost of ordinary life. And that is why falling inflation can still feel like expensive, never ended. In simple terms, the hardest part is this: the damage from the earlier surge stays with you. The pace can slow, but the higher prices remain. And unless your income rises enough to catch up, the pressure keeps following you from week to week. That is why a cooling inflation number can coexist with financial stress at the checkout line, at the gas pump, and in your monthly budget. The economic weather may be less stormy, but the water is still high around your feet. And if wages are slow to catch up, or if your household was already stretched before prices jumped, the effect feels even more intense. What looks like stabilization from far away can feel like permanent strain when you are the one paying for groceries and rent. This is also why people can feel angry when experts sound too cheerful too soon. It is not that people hate good news, it is that they know the bill for the bad news is still sitting on the kitchen table and still has to be paid. Now step back and put the pieces together. Prices rose sharply, many of those increases stuck, wages did not fully catch up, and the costs that matter most in daily life kept repeating month after month at the new higher level. That combination is powerful because it affects both numbers and emotions. It changes what your money can do, and it changes how safe, flexible, and comfortable your life feels when even ordinary routines begin costing more than they used to. So when you hear that inflation is falling, the right picture is not a rewind button on prices. The better picture is a car that was speeding, then slowed down, but kept rolling forward, meaning the distance already traveled does not disappear. Your rent does not return to the old lease, your grocery store does not restore last year's shelves, and your utility company does not send a note saying everything is magically cheaper again. The higher level stays, and you keep living inside it. That is the reason everything can still feel more expensive even when inflation is falling. Prices are not rising as fast as before, but they are still high, and high prices combined with slower wage growth can make daily life feel stuck in a more expensive version of itself. Once you see that clearly, the headlines stop feeling so confusing. Falling inflation is not fake, but it also is not the same thing as things getting cheap again. And mixing those up is what creates so much public frustration. The real question for households is not only whether inflation is lower than it was, the real question is whether incomes are catching up, whether budgets have room again, and whether ordinary people can finally feel some pressure come off. Until that happens, many families will continue to feel squeezed, no matter how much the charts improve. Because the lived experience of the economy happens in grocery stores, apartment leases, paychecks, bills, and all the other places where percentages turn into real life. So the next time you hear that inflation is cooling, remember this simple distinction. Inflation is about how fast prices rise, but expensive is about the level prices reached and whether your income can still handle living there. That is why everything can still feel more expensive even when inflation is falling. The climb may have slowed, but the mountain is still there, and for millions of people, it still feels steep every single month. If you want more simple breakdowns of the economy without the jargon, subscribe to the channel. Understanding what is happening does not lower your bills overnight, but it does help you see the system more clearly and make better decisions inside it.